you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MindShock. Today we are looking at UFOs from World War I, including stories that the Red Baron shot down an actual flying saucer in battle. I mean, these are really insane, mind-shocking stories, and they're not the only ones. I mean, there's quite a few stories of UFOs from various different fronts during the Great War, and we'll be taking a look at these baffling accounts in history. Do they provide some of the best evidence for the existence of UFOs? The listeners shall be the judges. As always, if you enjoy the Mind Shock podcast, find it interesting and thought-provoking, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the channel. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there with logic and reason at the forefront, examining topics and cases that most people do not examine objectively, logically, and neutrally. You could also support the channel by becoming a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, hit that bell for notifications, like and share Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Patreon. Patrons do get a priority for case, topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Alright, so this kind of made waves February 2015 when the Irish Mirror published this article regarding the Red Baron shooting down a UFO. This was written by Warren Manger. UFOs, Red Baron shot down flying saucer over the trenches and other paranormal phenomena from World War I. Other mysteries of the Great War include an angel appearing in the middle of a battle and thousands of British troops abducted by aliens. See, I haven't heard this account before. Thousands abducted by aliens? Not hundreds or dozens or one. Thousands of British troops? So let's dive into this here because this is quite mind-shocking. Stranger and scarier things than fighter pilots were patrolling the skies above the battlefields of France, according to a new book. During the First World War, soldiers and civilians reported a string of paranormal phenomena that historians and UFO experts have struggled to explain. So much so that it raises the question, were aliens watching us 30 years before the fabled crash landing at Roswell, New Mexico? Some of these spectacular sightings feature in a new book, UFOs of the First World War by Nigel Watson. The most famous flyer of the First World War was the German pilot Manfred Freer von Richthofen, better known as the Red Baron. No human pilot could match his skills in the air, and apparently neither could aliens. He supposedly spotted a UFO that looked like an upside-down silver saucer with orange lights during an early morning mission in the clear blue skies above Belgium in the spring of 1917. And just a real quick aside here. Some people point to all of these hoaxers who were making these fake UFO videos using actual plates and other things. Now, yeah, obviously there's a ton of fakes out there. But what a lot of people don't really think about is if the supposedly real, if the reported as real UFOs were actually looked exactly like upside down saucers or plates, wouldn't the people faking them replicate the report? I mean, coincidence, there's usually, so-called debunkers or skeptics that are, of course, not scientifically skeptical about any kind of official narratives because they're part of the cult of authority worship. If they were truly skeptical, they'd be skeptical of everything. That's what real science is. Science is skepticism, not blind faith or belief in any narrative on any side. But yeah, that's just an issue that I haven't really seen addressed. If the reports were that it looked exactly like a saucer, wouldn't people making fake videos and photos fake whatever they heard? Again, I mean, logic definitely going extinct in this day and age. Now, again, obviously that doesn't mean those fake videos are real in any way. It's just that's why they look like that. All right, continuing on here, fellow German Air Force ace Peter Waitsrick, who reportedly witnessed the dogfight, said, "We were terrified because we'd never seen anything like it before. The Baron immediately opened fire, and the thing went down like a rock, shearing off tree limbs as it crashed in the woods." 2 occupants allegedly survived the crash and clambered from the wreck before running into the trees. Weitzrick and his squadron initially thought the UFO was a secret U.S. aircraft until he read reports about flying saucers, and then he had no doubt that was what he saw. However, he did not share the story until 80 years after the event, when he was 105 years old, and the headline appeared in the Weekly World News in August 1999. Waitsrick said, "There's no doubt in my mind that the Baron shot down some kind of spacecraft from another planet, and those little guys who ran off in the woods were space aliens of some kind." However, historians have questioned the story, pointing out that the Fokker triplanes the squadron were allegedly flying were not put into operation service until August 1917, several months after the encounter. That's kind of weird. So-called historians, the authority-worshipping cultists. Obviously, aircraft are tested before they're officially... I mean, that's kind of a weird thing. Wow, coincidence theorists sinking to all new levels. I mean, that's weird. That's the hole they poke in his story? That the plane he flew, he couldn't have flown because on the paperwork, they weren't flying until several months later? Wow. Wow. Now, there's a few issues here. First of all, what is Weekly World News? I mean, supposedly that's not the most credible. Again, I don't want to fall for genetic logical fallacies. If the guy said it, he said it, regardless of if it's in a tabloid or whatever. Tabloids often do report quotes from people accurately. I mean, it happens. That's why genetic logical fallacies are genetic logical fallacies. This truth is whatever it is. Now, obviously, it would be nice to have multiple sources confirm that he did indeed give this story. Also, at 105 years old, I mean, again, some people at a 105 have relatively solid cognitive function. Others do not. So, whatever was going on with his memory, it would be interesting, obviously, to have some kind of health report on his mental capabilities at 105. Also, if any other individual who knew him throughout his life, the past few decades, if they could maybe verify whether he had mentioned this story decades ago. Or, you know, obviously not too many people are alive from back then, or nobody now, back in 99, also not that many. So, yeah, this is definitely a curiosity, but I still don't understand the immediate jump to another planet. Because if this is some kind of top secret aircraft from a different country, U.S. or not. See, if you haven't checked out the Roswell podcast on Mindshock, make sure you check that out. We go through various different theories, including the theory that the Russians used some kind of either midgets or deformed people, dressed them up in some kind of spacesuit to make them look like aliens, or possibly even more sinister, actually deformed regular humans themselves to make them look like aliens, and then they had some kind of spacecraft that they wanted to utilize as some kind of psychological operation, and that's what the Roswell crash was. It was the Russians making some kind of fake alien crash landing just to see what the response would be from the U.S. So that was 47. Was something in play? Did they have earlier missions like that? If those were legitimate, did they have earlier missions like that? And was this one of them? Because just because individuals are kind of clambering or hobbling, or again, they could have been injured from the crash, or they could have been really, really short pilots. Who knows? I mean, again, it's not really a clear description here, but I don't see the jump to another planet here. Obviously, these could also be some kind of interdimensional trickster spirits. For those not familiar with the work of John Keel and Jacques Vallée, they bring forth some very interesting theories regarding UFOs. But continuing with the article here on Irish Mirror, the disappearing soldiers. During the disastrous Gallipoli campaign, up to 4,000 men from the Royal Norfolk Regiment was supposedly snatched by aliens who swooped over the battlefield in giant gray clouds. 3 New Zealand soldiers said they saw several hundred British soldiers march toward Hill 60 at Sulva Bay in Turkey, August 21st, 1915. At the top of the hill was a more solid-looking cloud that was 800 feet long, 220 feet high, and 200 feet wide. Their statement, made in April 65, said when they arrived at this cloud, they marched straight into it with no hesitation, but no one ever came out to fight. About an hour later, this cloud very unobtrusively lifted off the ground until it joined other similar clouds, and they all moved away northwards. The soldiers insisted the British demanded the return of the regiment when Turkey surrendered, but the Turks denied any knowledge of the soldiers. While many have dismissed the statement as a hoax, it has been corroborated by the final report of the Dardanelles Commission, written in 1917 and finally declassified in 1965. All right, so yeah, the big questions here, I mean, they have all these soldiers as names, right? So they just have no recovered bodies. What's the deal with this cloud? Was it just foggy? I mean, what's the deal here? So let's go to historic-uk.com. The 5th Battalion Norfolk Regiment, The True Story by Steve Smith. This article is designed to tell the true story of what happened to the 5th Battalion Norfolk Regiment on August 12, 1915 at Kuchuk and Afarta Ova, Gallipoli during World War I. Supported by recent research, it dispels many of the myths attached to the battalion, including disappearing into a cloud of smoke. The first myth is that the Norfolks were called the Sandringham Battalion, but this is not correct. It is incorrect because it recruited from all over North Norfolk, with companies being raised by towns as far apart as Great Yarmouth and Dereham. In fact, what was known as E Company ceased to exist on February 8, 1915, when during a major reform they converted to a 4-company battalion, merging with C Company to become King's Company. The second myth has to be covered by considering a number of claims. 1, dispatched by Sir Ian Hamilton, reported, but the colonel, with 16 officers and 250 men, still kept pushing on, driving the enemy before them. Nothing more was ever seen or heard of any of them. They charged into the forest and were lost to sight or sound. Not one of them ever came back. When the 50th anniversary of Gallipoli came around in 65, references to the Sandringham Company Battalion and Regiment first started to emerge when 3 New Zealand veterans claimed to have seen a British regiment marching up a sunken road to be swallowed up in a cloud. 3, this led to other theories that they had been kidnapped by aliens who had landed in flying saucers, and a book and TV adaptation depicted a highly charged new solution to the mysteries, suggesting they had been executed by the Turks. We now know that a number of the Norfolks managed to advance 1,400 yards to a sunken road before stopping and awaiting the rest of the battalion. Second Lieutenant Fox commanded the small group, and he was ordered to press on by the CO, Colonel Proctor Beauchamp. Virtually all of them were taken down when they bunched up in a gap covered by a machine gun. A small element of the Norfolks managed to reach a small vineyard, and another element managed to get to a group of small cottages when they were joined by Colonel Proctor Beauchamp and the adjutant. Beauchamp was seen by Private S.T. Smith to say, "Hound them out, boys." It was the last time he was seen alive, and probably the last order he ever gave. It was here that the surviving officers managed to take stock of what had happened, and Major W. Barton and Lieutenant Evelyn Beck led the survivors back to friendly lines when it became dark, and the mystery was, in fact, cleared up by the press very early on. The local papers initially reported the loss of the 5th Norfolk officers on August 28, 1915, and accounts from men who were there were published soon after, especially in the Yarmouth Mercury and the Lynn News. One article, dated August 27, 1915, noted, "It is with the deepest regret that we publish the list of missing officers of the 5th Territorial Battalion of the Norfolk Regiment. At the time of the going press, no further information is available than the bare fact that they are missing." Hamilton's dispatch did not appear until the 6th of January, 1916, and the 7th, 1916, the Eastern Daily Press reported Sandringham men disappear. The article went on to state that 16 officers and 250 men pushed deep into enemy lines and were lost from sight and sound. None of them ever came back. This directly quoted Hamilton's after-action report. But on February 15th, 1916, the Linnet News reported that one officer was now recovering from wounds in a hospital as a prisoner of the Turks in Constantinople, and noted, "This news of Captain Coxon will come as a relief to not only his friends but also those who are still awaiting news of other officers and men of the 5th Norfolks. It is obvious that an officer in the hospital would have greater opportunities for writing home than his friends and others who are not wounded but are prisoners of war." And there is an excellent article printed in the Lynn News from a survivor. "I did not see anything of the missing officers after I got lost. I heard the colonel call out when we approached the huts. I have referred to, but I did not see him then. I did not hear him again afterwards. During the attack, I did not see anything of Captain Patrick. I did not see any wood into which the officers and men could have disappeared, and I certainly did not see them charge into a wood. In fact, the Norfolks did not charge as far as my knowledge goes. I know absolutely nothing about how the officers and men disappeared. At first, like others, I thought that the officers and men who are now reported missing had returned to other trenches, but later I found that this was not the case. I inquired a lot about them, but all I could find out was that they had disappeared, vanished. We could only come to the conclusion that they had advanced too far, had been captured, and made prisoners of war. We knew that some of the men had been killed and others had been wounded, so it did not seem at all unlikely that these others had been captured by the enemy. I heard no news about the 5th Norfolks charging into a wood until I came home. Private Sidney Pooley of the 5th Norfolk Regiment." As with countless engagements in World War I, the bodies of the men who fell that day did not have the luxury of a burial detail. In fact, they lay where they fell until 1919, when the battalion's chaplain, the Reverend Pierrepoint Edwards, found them and reported at the time, "We have found the 5th Norfolks. There were 180 in all, 122 Norfolk and a few Hants and Suffolks with 2 4th Cheshires. We could only identify 2, Private Barnaby and Carter. They were scattered over an area of about 1 square mile at a distance of at least 800 yards behind the Turkish front line. Many of them had evidently been killed in a farm, as a local Turk who owns the place told us that when he came back he found the farm covered with the decomposing bodies of British soldiers, which he threw into a small ravine. The whole thing quite bears out the original theory that they did not go very far on, but got mopped up one by one, all except the ones who got into the farm." And the casualty list recorded between 12th and 31st of August 1915 is 11 officers and 151 other ranks killed. This total comes from a database called Soldiers Died in the Great War. Supported by recent research, the article may perhaps help to clarify what had happened to the 5th Battalion Norfolk Regiment and acknowledges their bravery and tenacity in the face of an extremely determined enemy, by Steve Smith. So it actually doesn't clear up a whole lot. So they did have a certain amount of names here, in the hundreds, not in the thousands. And then also, if there was a UFO or some kind of mystical fog of interdimensional tricksters that teleported the officers, who's to say they didn't teleport them back and they were either already dead or still alive and then killed at that time? It seems the only way to truly clarify this is from the Turkish side. Because did they open fire on these men? Did they see these men? Like, what happened there? So these accounts, or if there were thousands abducted and still unaccounted for, were a certain portion returned? Or was there also Turkish fire, and those are the ones that were killed by the Turkish fire, meanwhile others disappeared? So obviously, World War I, it is difficult to recover bodies and know exactly each individual's name and make perfect accounting. I mean, they tried, and they did that to a certain extent. But yeah, that doesn't really clear up a whole lot. But clearly, this battalion did exist. For the coincidence theorists trying to deny their very existence, it does clear up the fact that this battalion did in fact exist. Okay, moving on here on the Irish Mirror article, the Aldburg platform. Closer to home, there was a strange sighting in the skies above Suffolk. Daily Mirror reader A.E. Whiteland wrote to the newspaper in 1968 about an aircraft his mother saw from the upstairs window of her home in the town of Aldeburgh during the First World War. His mother, then 84, told him the story many times over the years, and he was keen to find out what happened. Whiteland wrote, "A little above the level of the house, 8 to 12 men appeared on what seemed to be a round platform with a handrail around it, which they were gripping tightly." She could see them so clearly they were wearing blue uniforms and little round hats not unlike sailors. She heard no sound from the machine as it came off the marshes. It turned a bit, went over the railway yard to disappear behind some houses. The initial explanation was that the Whitelands' mother had seen an observation carriage lowered from a Zeppelin. However, aviation historian Charles Gibbs said this was certainly not the case, as an observation platform was so tiny it could only take one man and would not be lowered so near to the ground. UFO researcher Carl Grove carried out a full investigation but was never able to come up with any plausible explanation. Interesting. So here's the full account from East Anglian Daily Times, eadt.co.uk. This is an article by Stacia Briggs and Siafra Connor, January 18th, 2020, updated October 11th, 2020. Weird Suffolk, the UFO that appeared above Aldeburgh to the wife of a man who saw black shuck. It was an unremarkable sunny summer day at lunchtime when something strange appeared in the sky over Aldeburgh. Germans or aliens? The beds were made, the room was dusted, and Agnes Whiteland took a moment to gaze out of her window in Aldeburgh to see if anyone interesting was passing by. What she saw that lunchtime haunted her for the rest of her life. It was 1916 or 1917. This part of the story is slightly hazy. And war was raging in Europe with terrible bloodshed and a loss of a generation, but at home all was not quiet on the Eastern Front. In 1915, Zeppelin air raids had led to panic in Suffolk as bombs fell from the sky at nearby Henham Hall and Southwold before attacking Lowestoft. The creation of Count von Zeppelin's hydrogen flying machine unleashed the full horror of aerial warfare on the East Coast, leaving terror in its wake and civilians feeling vulnerable on the home front for the first time. But Agnes Whiteland was convinced what she saw that day was no Zeppelin. For a start, the craft was silent. Secondly, there were no bombs. On August 8, 1968, Alfred Whiteland, who was born in 1910, saw the letter he had written to the Daily Mirror published, "My mother has often told the following story over the years, and as she is 84, I would like to find out for her who these mystery men were and what they were doing. This is the story," he wrote. "It was about the middle of World War I and on a weekday. Mother was living at Aldeburgh, Suffolk. She had gone upstairs just before dinner, opened the casement window, and looked out to see who might be on the road. Having looked up and down and noticed there was no one in sight, she was about to step back when something urged her to look again. A little above the level of the house, 8 to 12 men appeared on what seemed to be a round platform with a handrail around it. This they were gripping tightly. She could not see them so clearly. They were wearing blue uniforms and little round hats not unlike sailors. She heard no sound from the machine as it came off the marshes. It turned a bit, went over the railway yard to disappear behind some houses. Have you any explanation for this? The so-called Aldeburgh platform hovered just above a shed around 8 meters high and turned surprisingly quickly and with great agility at a right angle before it disappeared. Mother says that she kept wondering what was making the thing move and looked up in the sky and then at the men and then in between their legs to see if there was an engine there in the middle, but she could see nothing there," wrote Mr. Whiteland Jr., who died 18 years after his mother in 1989. The Zeppelin theory was quickly dispatched. Researcher Charles Grove, who wrote to the Charles Gibbs Smith of the Victorian and Albert Museum to ask if the craft could have been an observation platform below one of the German warships. No, he was told, as such platforms only carried one man who would be lying down, and Zeppelins were notoriously noisy. Also, wouldn't there have been a record of that? I mean, and how did nobody else see this? This is my number one question. Nobody else saw this? UFO researcher Carl Groves wrote to Mr. Whiteland to find out more information, asking a list of questions and asking for sketches. He received all his answers plus drawings in response. He learned that the craft was traveling at the speed of a running man. Now, would that be Arnold Schwarzenegger speed or a regular running man? I don't know. That Mrs. Whiteland saw it for around 4 minutes, that it was seen on a bright summer day at around midday, and that no one else in Aldeburgh reported having seen it. See, that is suspect. How is a craft going to hang out for 4 minutes? See, if it was 4 seconds, zipped in, zipped out, I mean, maybe you could say only people looking in the general direction might have seen it. Now, it was silent, but still 4 minutes is a long time for... What's the population of Aldeburgh back then? I mean, I don't know. might have not been the absolute tiniest village, in which case there should have been a fair amount of people out and about in the middle of the day who could have glanced over within a span of 4 minutes. I mean, that's a long time. Not to mention, where did it come from? Where did it go? Nobody saw it coming or going in other areas either. These are all problematic. There's no corroboration here. Mrs. Whiteland never did receive any answers as to what she had seen that day, but others did come forward with similar stories. Mr. Graham wrote to Alfred to say that his mother, who lived nearby in Aldengrim Fen, had seen an airship lower an observation device hundreds of feet below it, while a Mr. Winslow of London said that the platforms beneath airship baskets could indeed hold several people. Okay, so other people did see things, just not that day? So were these some kind of covert operations going on? In October 55, long after Zeppelins flew over Britain, the Reverend Pitt Kethley was traveling on the Uxbridge train line to East Harrow when, at the West Hampstead Viaduct, he saw a reddish-brown and gray platform the size of a small bus at around 120 feet in the air. It was carrying around 20 men wearing helmets and in khaki uniforms and moved slowly and silently in his eye line for around 3 to 4 minutes. Reverend Pitt Kethley, when addressed with the theory that what he saw was the reflection of a double-decker bus, replied that he did not doubt the evidence of my own optics. That is kind of weird. Somebody sees something flying about, you're gonna go tell them, oh, that was just a reflection not being there. I mean, maybe it was, but it seems kind of silly to tell someone else that. I don't know. Interestingly, Agnes's husband, Ernest, also saw something strange, I'll bet, on the ground. In 1938, as he walked close to Ditchingham Station, he saw black shuck. So black shuck is apparently the Bungay black dog or something like that, like a giant dog, a spectral dog. We're not going to get into that, but it is curious. Is this family just known for embellishing stories, telling tall tales, or are they legitimate, or is one of the sightings legitimate and one not? Now, there is a little bit of corroboration, not that particular incident, but that something similar, these Zeppelin-type-like devices, craft that had some kind of observation-type platforms, other people did see them, just not that day at that time, and not in the exact city. So maybe there was something flying around. All right, so back to the Mirror article. This is now the Angel of Mons. It was supposedly a sign that God was on Britain's side, as British soldiers fled at the Battle of Mons in 1914. A strange figure appeared and fended off the German troops so that they could make their escape. Despite the full-scale retreat, the British lost just 1,600 men, a fraction of the huge losses suffered during other battles in the war. At the time, it was widely described as St. George, St. Michael, or a crowd of angelic warriors. News of the miracle spread so rapidly it was even reported in the Evening Standard. However, many UFO enthusiasts now believe that the angel was an alien visitor that took on a form the soldiers would recognize. UFO expert Kevin Goodman said the UFO enigma was unknown during the First World War conflict, so the troops would relate to an event such as this in the only way they could, by thinking they had a sign from God. You know what's interesting, too, is regardless if we're going interdimensional trickster spirits or extraterrestrial beings, if their intelligence level is high enough, they would take the form of whatever they were trying to accomplish regarding their audience, right? So a lot of people think that all these like religious manifestations prove the Bible or whatever. I mean, maybe they do. Again, this is mind shock. We don't fall for black and white logical fallacies or false dichotomies here. So that might also be true. And there might be aspects of that and visions and things relating to the Bible that are from that and true. But also, there could be other entities out there that specifically took the form of angels or any of these beings or saints or whatever, Jesus, God, whatever, for the sole purpose of communicating something specific with the humans. Would they not do that? Again, that seems like a relatively viable theory. Now, of course, I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying there's irrefutable proof to prove that theory true. I'm saying that's one of the options if the event was legitimate. Flaming onions. The so-called flaming onions terrified World War I fighter pilots because no one knew what they were, and they moved too fast for an aircraft to take evasive action. Cambridge historian Dennis Winter recounted in his book, The First of the Few, that the flaming onions were green glowing balls which twisted about like live things and seemed to chase an aeroplane, turning over end on end in a leisurely way. The mystery of these UFOs has never been solved, though one explanation is that they may have been strings of flares fired by a German 5-barreled anti-aircraft gun called the Lichtspacker, or light spitter. Did those have honing capabilities? Because if they had honing capabilities, that would explain them curving after their targets. Lady Sopwith, first spotted by Lieutenant Frederick Ardsley as he flew from Amiens to Villers-Bocage in northern France on an early morning patrol on January 9, 1918. He spotted an identical SE-5 biplane flying next to his and was stunned when the pilot removed their goggles with a loud laugh to reveal a cascade of golden hair. The beauty blew a kiss at Ardsley before performing a can-can dance on the edge of her cockpit. When Ardsley tried to shoot her down... Wait, why would he be shooting her down? If she's got a plane with the same... It's the same plane he's flying, why would he shoot her down? When Ardsley tried to shoot her down and pursued her plane, she darted, rolled, and dipped with such skill he could not keep up. Eyewitnesses on the ground reported watching the dogfight. This was just the start of the legend of Lady Sopwith, who reportedly shot down German pilots who nicknamed her the Valkyrie, and was spotted by civilians, including a 6-year-old boy. So here's an interesting article on vocal.media, Futurism, subsection, The Lady Sopwith Mystery, by Nigel Watson 5 years ago. The World War I Phantom Aviator and Her Flying Circus. Did a mystery aviatrix haunt the skies over France? Was she a myth, a fake news story, a phantom, pilots in drag having a laugh, or a secret squadron of women recruited to boost morale? She was apparently first spotted by Lieutenant Frederick Ardsley as he was flying from Amiens to Villers-Bocage, northern France, on an early morning patrol. On Wednesday, January 9th, 1918, he was flying at a height of 10,000 feet when he saw an identical SE-5 Scout Experimental 5 biplane flying next to him. The odd thing about the aircraft was that its engine made a buzzing sound like something out of a toy shop, and it had a golden symbol for Venus on the fuselage rather than the normal red, white, and blue Royal Flying Corps roundels and ID numbers. Even stranger, the pilot removed their goggles with a loud laugh, revealing a cascade of golden hair. How could he hear her laugh over the engine? The female pilot with cornflower blue eyes waved and kissed at Ardsley before conducting a can-can dance on the edge of her cockpit. Returning to the cockpit, the woman sharply banked left, and Ardsley went in hot pursuit of her. Yet he struggled to keep up with her as her aircraft darted, rolled, and dipped, or suddenly accelerated out of range of his guns. Her aircraft easily climbed to a bank of clouds at an altitude of 20,000 feet. He tried shooting her down with his fuselage machine guns, but they jammed after 4 seconds, and his Lewis gun also jammed. Ardsley's aircraft struggled as it tried following the other SE-5, and it inevitably stalled, forcing him to make a controlled dive. This apparently was the start of the legend of Lady Sopwith. At the end of January, a German pilot, Albert Rohl, was shot down behind Allied lines. When he was interrogated, he said he was shot down by a female pilot, Die Walker, the Valkyrie, as he called her. From then on, many German aviators encountered a red-nosed SE-5 or a red Sopwith triplane piloted by a woman who shot them down. Her aircraft outflew every other aircraft in the sky, and dozens of Allied pilots saw her shooting the tails off enemy aircraft as easily as shooting fish in a barrel. Is this some kind of like Fast and the Furious situation back in World War I where someone just tuned up a plane so that it can outmaneuver and outfight any other plane? The Fast and the Furious of the skies in World War I. Lady Sopwith was also seen by civilians, including a 6-year-old Robert Tuchel, who was just about to get spanked by his mother when an SE-5 zoomed overhead, making a loud roar. The distraction enabled Robert to run free and wave his thanks to the blonde pilot, so she also saved kids from spankings. A variant of Lady Sopwith with the sighting of a German Fraulein with long yellow braids who flew a black and white Fokker biplane She was seen whenever things looked bad for the Allies. Theories about her ranged from her being the sister of Red Baron, seeking her revenge for his death April 21st, 1918, which would not account for earlier sightings, to her being the tomboy sister of British RFC ace Captain Albert Ball, who was killed on May 7th, 1917. Rather than personal revenge, Americans tended to think there was a secret squadron of lady pilots, or the legend was just a publicity or propaganda stunt. The novelist Arch Whitehouse thought he had the answer to this mystery. I think I know the actual basis for this flossy legend that began innocently enough on a field near Shipoli near the Somme. We had a squadron of SE-5 pilots on the same field with us, and these young scout pilots were always up to some healthy devilment. Around Christmas 1917, they decided to enliven the dreary days by organizing a squadron party complete with a theatrical performance. The legend was born when some mechanics saw the pilot in drag climb into the cockpit of an SE-5 after the performance. Certainly it sounds like the stuff of legend and myth with a good dollop of wish fulfillment thrown into the mix. The lady was a protector and savior to the Allies, yet there was also the German Fraulein pilot who seemed to be her polar opposite. A few things shot down the reality of the first encounter experienced by Lieutenant Frederick Ardsley. First of all, Ardsley doesn't appear in the list of RFC pilots for that period, and secondly, it was claimed he was in the 49th Squadron, which did not use SE-5 aircraft. Again, I mean, these are just paperwork issues. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not on the books, especially way back then. I mean, now, even now, there's stuff that's not on the books, but it's a little harder to get away with. Over 100 years ago, it was relatively easy to get away with stuff. If it did happen, as Ardsley said, the aviatrix could have been a trick of his imagination caused by him blacking out after flying too high, or more likely this was a work of fiction dressed as fact that satisfied the needs of the time. In our own day, it is all too easy to suggest that she was an alien or a squadron of aliens who flew high-tech flying saucers disguised as biplanes, which relates to our own psychological, sociological, and culturally specific need to read everything in terms of UFOs. I mean, yeah, if you're biased, you're biased, but it doesn't mean it wasn't UFO related, or it could have been an interdimensional trickster as well. I mean, you never know with those interdimensional tricksters. They're always up to some shenanigans. Back to the Irish Mirror here. Some believed her to be the tomboy sister of British Flying Corps ace Captain Albert Ball, who was killed May 1917. However, it has been suggested she was little more than a myth that began when some mechanics saw a pilot wearing drag climb into the cockpit of an SE-5 after a Christmas concert party. I mean, yeah, if those reports got conflated, okay. So yeah, that's the story here. The Inquisitor has a couple extra details on the Red Baron encounter here by Tim Butters, October 22nd, 2016. German fighter pilot ace Manfred Albrecht Freiherr von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, is officially credited with shooting down 80 planes. 80 enemy planes during World War I. But a sensational new book claims that the man considered the Flight Ace Supreme was also the first pilot in history to shoot down a UFO. It's a big boast, but the Red Baron has a big reputation. So much so that in his new book, UFOs of the First World War, author Nigel Watson recounts the 99 confession by the Red Baron's fellow pilot, Peter Weitzrich, who allegedly witnessed the epic encounter in the skies between the Red Baron and the UFO. Weitzrich waited until he was 105 years old, a good 80 years after the Baron's alleged dogfight with interplanetary visitors, until confessing what he saw in the crystal blue skies above Belgium during the spring of 1917. The Red Baron and Weitzrich were on an early morning mission when they ran afoul of what they described as looking like an upside-down silver saucer covered in flashing orange lights. Would a stealth craft have flashing orange lights, though? No doubt well aware that curiosity killed the cat and also shot the fighter pilot who stopped to pause for breath, the Red Baron instinctively allowed his abject terror at the sight of this unidentified flying object get the better of him and didn't hesitate to open fire and mow that mother down. Interesting language here in the Inquisitor. The Mirror reports that Weitzrich claims he witnessed the entire encounter between the Baron and the aliens. We were terrified because we'd never seen anything like it before. The Baron immediately opened fire and the thing went down like a rock, shearing off tree limbs as it crashed into the woods. Admittedly, the Red Baron was in a league of his own when it came to his skills as a fighter pilot, but was Manfred Albrecht Freiherr von Richthofen, handicapped as he was by the technical limitations of the Fokker triplane and the Albatros D3 serial 789/16 so naturally gifted when it came to flying that he was capable of gunning down a UFO that presumably had the capacity to journey through galaxies and was capable of doing all sorts of mind-blowing crazy things. Again, I don't understand why ufologists just do not consider the interdimensional trickster theory, because they might not necessarily be that technologically advanced or traveling from other worlds or great distances. Whitestrick believes so. He claims that there were two pilots in the UFO, and after crashing, they climbed from the wreck before fleeing into the trees. Perhaps these extraterrestrials were simply teenage joyriders from another dimension who had bitten off a little more than they could chew. See, now we're talking. Now we're talking plausible theories here. Who knows? One thing's for sure, although Whitestrick and his squadron originally believed the UFO was a secret U.S. aircraft, when they became familiarized with reports about the UFOs, they remained convinced that what they saw were visitors from another planet. There's no doubt in my mind that the Barons shot down some sort of spacecraft from another planet, and those little guys ran off into the woods were space aliens of some kind. So another thing, I mean, and this isn't to disparage any of the older generations. They're, of course, much smarter than our current generation in many ways. But in other ways, when it comes to just sheer amount of information flooding, there was no internet. There was a lot less media. I mean, basically, if they didn't have a large library, they were quite limited in the different theories that they could even consider, because you don't know what you don't know. So it's not really their fault that these people from older time periods, they wouldn't necessarily think interdimensional trickster spirits right off the bat. They also wouldn't necessarily just jump to other governments performing false flags under the guise of being aliens. So, I mean, these are things we think about now because we've been exposed to these theories, but had these theories never been floated by anyone ever, the average person wouldn't, I mean, even a smart person, they wouldn't just randomly think of it, oh, maybe it's this theory. So we do have to keep that in mind when addressing older cases in anything relating to the paranormal or supernatural in any way. So let's look at the phantom airship phenomena. There's an excellent article here in The Statesman, The First X-Files, published June 4th, 2016 by Rob Wow. Did German fighter pilot Manfred Albert Freiherr von Richthofen, popularly known as the Red Baron, really shoot down a flying saucer over the battlefields of World War I? Did an angel really save the lives of British troops? Bizarrely, a team of British intelligence officers was assigned to investigate weird sightings in the skies during World War I, becoming the precursor of unidentified flying object investigators, both real and fictional. So this is curious. So apparently these reports were so prevalent that they necessitated the formation of a special British intelligence unit. What does everybody make of that? I mean, that's curious. That's definitely curious. That leads us to believe that they might have thought there was definitely something being reported. They didn't just think these were just myths, random myths and legends that didn't deserve any actual and funded investigation. Here they're having actual British intelligence officers on the clock investigating these things. Most of us think of UFOs and mysterious sightings in the sky as a modern phenomenon, but phantom airships became a huge panic in the early years of the 20th century and regularly featured in newspapers. By the time of World War I, a more scientific approach was needed. A predecessor to MI5, Military Observation Department 5, MO5, under the control of a Lieutenant Colonel Kell, was assigned the task of classifying sightings in the air. Amid the panic about enemy airships, it was a military necessity to weed out phantom airships from real aircraft sightings. Nigel Watson, author of UFOs of the First World War, says it can be regarded as the first ever official guide to studying UFO reports long before the CIA or any other organization got with the subject, when flying saucer sightings were all the rage after World War II. During World War I, there were numerous reports of mysterious lights and objects moving about in the skies. These were studied by the Assistant Director of Military Aeronautics, a post held by Lieutenant Colonel W.S. Branker, and the Department of Military Training. And Branker and Kell can be regarded as the first Mulder and Scully who studied the flow of UFO-type reports that flowed into their offices. The reports sent to Branker and Kell sound eerily like today's UFO sightings and came amid widespread panic not only about enemy airships, but also more mysterious sightings. A 1914 telegram from the Chief Constable of Lancashire said, "Large red light seen at 8:45 p.m. today passing over Runcorn Bridge arches." Immediately afterwards, an explosion was heard in Widnes and Runcorn. The guidelines set out by the War Office helped MO5 officers categorize sightings as of natural origin or as something more mysterious. Various legends about extraterrestrials were circulated during World War I, of which the most astonishing and implausible was that the Red Baron shot down a UFO. After the war, fellow pilots claimed Baron von Richthofen shot down a flying saucer-type craft from which 2 inhabitants fled. Fellow German pilot Peter Weitzrich said that the fighter saw an aircraft like an upside-down saucer. "We were terrified because we'd never seen anything like it before. The Baron immediately opened fire, and the thing went down like a rock, shearing off trees as it crashed into the woods. There's no doubt in my mind that the Baron shot down some kind of spacecraft from another planet, and those little guys who ran off into the woods were space aliens of some kind," he said. But the story is highly dubious, given that Weitzrich didn't share his story until 80 years after his event, and chose to do so in the U.S. tabloid Weekly World News. Okay, some counterpoints there, though. Military individuals might be reluctant, especially the older they are from more previous generations. I mean, now there's military members all over the place talking about UFOs. Even still, there's still still that stigma now. But way back then, I mean, what kind of self-respecting officer would talk about that? But the other thing is he might have just felt like he didn't need to talk about it. And everyone has their own instincts about their own health. Some people's are accurate, some are not. But if he felt fine well into the age of 100 and he didn't feel like he was dying or his end was near, why would he share something like that? That's why deathbed confessions or deathbed stories, so to speak, they're quite interesting. They are quite interesting because at a certain point when one has nothing left to lose, they might tell the truth about something. So if at 105 he felt like his end was drawing near and he just really wanted to share it just because it'd be something that he had been holding back and he just felt he needed to share it, and if the only publication willing to listen to him was a U.S. tabloid, I mean, what choice does he have? Either get it out there or not get it out at all. So, I mean, you know, these are kind of logically fallacious points. Also, a lot of stories in U.S. tabloids do turn out to be true. Some of them are reported much earlier than they become factually known. So all the coincidence theorists and the authority-worshipping cultists, they all pretend it's nonsense. Then when it's true, they all pretend they never pretended it was nonsense in the first place because now it's accepted as true. I mean, that's kind of the MO of coincidence theorists. So yeah, I don't find that crazy, although I do wish there was follow-up investigation. I mean, did anybody who knew Weitzrich in the previous decades, did he really not mention this a single time? If he had mentioned it to other people a few times, then yes, it would be much more credible that at least he believed he was telling what he believed to be the truth. Continuing on here, UFO fans claim that aliens may have abducted people from the battlefields of World War I during the Gallipoli campaign. Witnesses claim to have seen British soldiers marching towards Hill 60 at Solva Bay in Turkey, August 21st, 1915, before being snatched up by a solid-looking cloud. Another thought I had, too, is this some type of bioweapon or some other type of weapon? Or like with the Philadelphia experiment, were they doing these kind of interdimensional portal teleportation experiments all the way back in World War I? And the Philadelphia experiment is, of course, a theory we do need to go over on a dedicated MindShock podcast episode. I've been following that one for quite some time. It would be interesting to see how much new information has come to light through declassified documents and such regarding the Philadelphia experiment. But if all these experiments in World War II, who's to say they weren't doing them in World War I? So there could definitely be more to that story. Without knowing all of the information from the Turkish side, I mean, it seems like it's very unlikely that the real truth will ever be known without that critical information from the other side. A statement from a supposed eyewitness published in 1965 said, "When we arrived at the cloud, they marched straight into it with no hesitation. No one ever came out to fight. About an hour later, the cloud very unobtrusively lifted off the ground until it joined the other similar clouds. Then they all moved away northwards." It seems likely, however, this is a hoax. Documents released after the armistice suggest that 180 bodies found behind enemy lines are those of the missing soldiers, and the story of the cloud is a myth, unless, of course, it's not. Again, false dichotomies. An angel, which many British soldiers credited with saving their lives in the first most brutal battles of World War I, has been seized by UFO fans as evidence of extraterrestrials. Many soldiers credited the strange apparitions with saving their lives, and the story became a staple of parish magazines. The battle had been one of the first in which the British faced the Germans, and despite retreating, only 1,600 lives were lost. Decades later, the debate still rages, some attributing the angel to a short story from the Evening Standard, others to British intelligence. I mean, would that really scare the Germans, though, if British intelligence just started, whatever, making reports, there's an angel, there's an angel? I mean, I don't know. Popular author Arthur Machen claimed that this legend was created by his fictional The Bowman story published in the Evening News September 29, 1914. In it, British soldiers call on St. George for aid and are helped by ghostly bowmen from the Battle of Agincourt. One fact that lends weight to this theory is that few reports of the incident exist before Machen's story. Nigel Watson says, even today, the legend is swathed in controversy. Theories about it range from it being a myth based on Machen's story and the product of hallucinations due to stress and exhaustion, real angelic visitations, ghosts, swamp gas, airships, or alien UFOs projecting or shaping themselves to the expectation of the witnesses. Back in April 2010, Britain released hundreds of previously secret UFO files, including a letter saying that Winston Churchill had ordered a 50-year cover-up of a wartime encounter between a UFO and military pilot. The files published by the National Archives span decades and contain scores of witness accounts, sketches, and classified briefing notes documenting mysterious sightings across Britain. One Ministry of Defense note refers to a 1999 letter stating that a Royal Air Force plane returning from a mission in Europe during World War II was approached by a metallic UFO. The unidentified author of the letter said his grandfather attended a wartime meeting between Churchill and Dwight Eisenhower, during which the two expressed concern over the incident and decided to keep it secret. The Ministry of Defense subsequently investigated the case but found no written record of the incident, the files say. I mean, were the files made to disappear? In a 1999 note, the ministry said it does not have any expertise or role in respect of UFO flying saucer matters, or to the question of the existence or otherwise of extraterrestrial life forms, about which it remains totally open-minded. That's an interesting statement from the Ministry of Defense. Plausible deniability. Britain has been slowly releasing long classified files relating to sightings of mysterious craft in the skies above its cities, compiled and investigated by the Ministry of Defense over past decades. Some cases subsequently received rational explanations, such as meteors burning up in the atmosphere, but many are unsolved. One memo, dated 1997, contains reports of sonic booms and a mysterious plane crash in northern England. No wreckage was found in an ensuing search by police and rescue teams. Another incident refers to sightings of a black triangular UFO over the home of the Shadow Home Secretary in Kent in the late 1990s. An investigation showed no breach of security. What is a Shadow Home Secretary? Is that some kind of clandestine group? In a case filed in 1995, the captain of a plane approaching Manchester's airport reported a near miss with an unidentified object, and a witness on the ground separately provided a sketch showing a UFO 20 times the size of a football field. An inquiry failed to identify the object, the memo said. Buried deep among meticulous sketches and ministry memos, some files refer to curious episodes in Britain's history. During the Cold War, it sent fighter jets to intercept Soviet aircraft as often as 200 times a year, one document from the ministry showed. The note, filed in 1996, said mysterious sightings picked up on radar during the Cold War were invariably proved to be Soviet anti-submarine or long-range reconnaissance planes. Prior to the demise of the former Soviet Union, aircraft were scrambled some 200 times annually to intercept and investigate uncorrelated tracks penetrating the UK air defense region from the north. The last such scramble was in September 1991, around the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Or at least the last known one. But if that is true, that means perhaps the Soviets were messing around with a lot of UFO-type operations, psychological or otherwise. So those are some interesting accounts and stories. I mean, there's enough of them, and they were believed to at least necessitate actual official investigation. That's what's curious here. A real-life X-Files. Very, very interesting. And believe it or not, there's so many more UFO reports from this time period. I mean, the bigger ones, I'll be doing dedicated episodes on them. This was just kind of like an overview of the bigger events, the ones that kind of turned into myth and legend, of course, regarding the Red Baron and others. But it's curious because all of this predated Roswell. That's what's really, really curious. All predating Roswell. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the MindShock podcast. If you want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. You can also just go to youtube.com/mindshock to check for the latest episodes. You can also support the channel by becoming a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share the podcast. Let's bring logic and reason back to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis co-podcaster requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.